Peace everyone, Unmask here. Welcome back to another live critique session, critiquing your artwork. Hey there, Barbara, Diane, Dottie, Susan, Claire, Robin, Joanne. Good to see all of you. Hope you're having a lovely week so far. The weekend is upon us, so let's just jump right into the artwork, shall we? So first up is Dottie, and she submitted this lovely portrait of her husband, and it came out really, really good. You should be very proud. You did a fantastic job on this graphite portrait here. There is, of course, a few things that I can point out, but first off, let's talk about what you did right. First off, the accuracy of the drawing looks very, very good. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, all the facial features look very accurate, so you should be pleased with the outcome of that. And the overall composition is really great. This is a good example of a well-chosen reference photo, because as a photo, it looks fine. But as a drawing, I think that it actually looks a lot better as a drawing than a photo. And the artistic choice of removing the background, because you have these trees back here that have all of this texture and there's a lot of distraction, and removing that and just giving it this soft faded background was a really, really good choice, because it draws so much more attention to the subject. So compositionally, this is spot on what I would have done had I drawn this portrait myself. I think the only small thing that I would have changed is given him the rest of his shoulder just a little bit more, because there's not a lot of information that's missing from the reference photo. And I think that given your obvious capabilities, I think adding on the rest of the shoulder at least a little bit could have gone a long way as to just not feeling somewhat chopped off. It just looks a little chopped off on the shoulder. And so I would have just slid him over to the right a little bit and finished off that shoulder, just to the point that where the shoulder would come down, it stops at the same line that you cut off for everything else. That would have given it a little bit more of that bust-like structure where you have the head and the shoulders down to like this area of the chest. And so compositionally, that's probably the only thing that I would have changed. So you did excellent. Now, getting into the nitty gritty of some of the things that you can improve on, one of the things that stands out to me almost immediately, and depending on who you are, things will probably stand out slightly different. But jumping back to the background, you have a light source that you've somewhat established here, coming from sort of behind and towards the subject. The only problem with that is it's the opposite of where the light source is demonstrated everywhere else in the portrait. Because two things: there's not really a rim light that would justify that light in the background. If there was a rim light, then you would see a little bit of a highlight around this edge, and you could have added that. You could have added a rim light where you have this highlight that really brings the subject out from the background. Obviously, you wouldn't have to do it that extreme. If I can remember the shortcut keys, it doesn't seem I'm going to. Anyways, no. Is my keyboard working? Interesting. Anyways, hopefully that will figure itself out soon. But that light source coming from that side, there's nothing in the reference that would suggest that that is the case. What is happening? I'm unable to do. Well, this is not a fantastic start. What is happening? I literally can't do anything. Sorry about this, everyone. I've never had this problem before. Oh, gosh. Okay, I figured it out. Sorry about that. Um, I switched OBS to be on my other monitor. Usually it's on this monitor. And so when I opened up a window, it came on my second monitor, but I didn't see it, and so it wouldn't let me do anything because I needed to click out of that menu. Anyways, so the light source, everything's good. Yeah. So the light source in the original photo is pretty much top down, but it's coming from this direction. And a few key factors that you can use to determine that is you notice that the shadow direction is all coming this way. So the shadow cast from his head onto his neck, the shadow cast from his nose, although it's very subtle, the shadow cast from his eyebrows across this part of his eyes, over top of his eyelids. That tells us that the light direction is like this, not like this, the way that you've sort of created it in the background. The other small thing, being nitpicky in regards to the portrait, is that you put quite a bit of texture detail in the shirt, both with the horizontal lines and the thread lines in the collar here, which isn't inherently a bad choice. I think it's a good choice. The only problem is it draws a little bit too much attention from where you should be focusing on your detail, because the lower quality of the photo, you sort of lose some of the details in his mustache and his beard, and also in his hairs. So you don't have the high quality detail if it was like a photo taken with, you know, top end camera that captures like every pore of the face and stuff like that. And so you have pretty much the same level of detail in both the face, the hair, and then also the collar of the shirt, which you have to remember. What you always have to remember or remind yourself, what's the most important part of the project? Well, obviously it's going to be his face. That's where you want people to pay attention, especially in the eyes. You definitely want people to be looking right here in the center of the face. And I'm not saying that you can't put in the details of the shirt. You just want to make sure that it doesn't take away from the drawing. And in this case, I think that it does, because it's the same level of detail that you get in the face. Had you come in and put higher details in the face, say for instance, I grab a color here, and I'm going to try to do this with a mouse, but if I just put in a few little strands of hair here, maybe coming down, I guess he has a few there. And then let's say I took my eraser, because it looks like you have a Tombow mono eraser right there. And I'm just going to erase a couple strands of hair on my mouse. That might be a little bit too bright, but let's just go with it. If I just put in a few of these individual hairs, you can start to see that with just a few extra hairs, and I'm reminding you that I'm doing this with a mouse, so forgive the imperfections. It automatically just adds more detail with just a few extra lines, because right now the hair is very soft, and there's not any of those details that would be an individual hair. So in this case, I think had you done something like that, focusing on the face as opposed to the collar of the shirt, the collar would be fine, because the face would have more detail at that point. And the same is true with the beard mustache combo here. if you came in and you added a few of the smaller hairs, very small individual hairs, just to increase the level of detail, then I think it would have helped bring more attention to the face. Other than that, you did a fantastic job. Thank you for the submission. It's fantastic. So up next is Patricia, and she submitted this lovely acrylic landscape. And compositionally, it looks really good. It looks really balanced. I like the trees. I like the contrast. Everything's working really well. The level of detail as you're starting to move forward towards the viewer. So you have those pine trees there with like maximum texture along with the grass up front here. And everything looks good. I think if I were to change anything, let's see here, I'm going to quickly do this. So you probably know what I'm going to discuss, and that's going to be the sky here. Gosh, this keep forgetting the windows keep popping up on my other. So the sky, if you were to smooth out the sky, I think this would look a lot better. Now what? I'm having like the hardest time right now. Oh, okay. Now I see what. I apologize. I'm totally off on my Photoshop skills currently. Wow. I don't know any of my shortcut keys right now. It's awful. I've been using Blender for way too much recently. All right, there we go. Okay, so if the sky was smoother, I think that would add a lot more depth to the scene. So I'm just going to artificially smooth it out here. And then what I'll do is I'll just bring back the moon. This, and let's soften it a little bit because the moon, even though it appears sharp, it shouldn't really be that sharp. So I'll just kind of bring back the moon, having some texture there. And with just that subtle change of blending out the sky more, you draw more attention and you create more distance between the ground and the sky. And this is one of the most important aspects of landscape artwork, is that you need to control the level of texture. So I don't talk about it too much because I don't do a lot of landscapes, but there's 3 types of contrast that you need to be aware of when you're doing landscapes or any project that involves depth, where things are meant to appear farther away and things are slowly get closer towards you. And those 3 types of contrast, the first and most obvious one that most people are aware of is just value. So value is how you develop contrast with light and dark. So as you get farther away, the values are less striking, meaning that objects that are far away aren't as dark as objects that come closer to you. So your sky here, it is a nighttime sky. So you can use black, you can use dark colors to establish that there's no light really in the sky except for probably some stars, some highlights on clouds if you wanted them, and then of course the moon here. By the way, the moon should be perfectly round. Your moon is sort of oval shaped, so be careful with that. Anytime you do a sun or moon, you got to make sure that circle is perfect because people are going to notice, and it makes a big difference with just that level of precision. Now, the second type of contrast that a lot of people are aware of is saturation. So in landscapes, again, just like with value, as you get further away, the saturation comes down. So objects that are farther away, they are less saturated. So for instance, if you just had a field of grass that goes on infinitely, just a field of grass, nothing else, just a field of green grass, and it goes on infinitely. If you were standing there and you wanted to paint it, actually, if you're just standing there in person, the further you go with your eyes towards the horizon of that grass that goes on infinitely, that grass is going to become lighter and grayer. It's going to appear less green. And the reason that is because there's atmosphere between you and what's really far away. And the further you go away, the further that you can see, I believe is like 16 miles or something, like 30 kilometers. On flat surface, you can see about 30 kilometers because the curvature of the earth. And that atmosphere, as you look farther away, gets more compacted in your field of vision, which grays out things that are farther away. And so that's what happens. And so your paintings need to reflect that because that's what people see as well in real life. And so in the case of this project, you are going monochromatic in the sense of black, white plus Payne's gray is still technically monochromatic. Your middle value or your middle tone is just Payne's gray. You need to do that as well. So your mountains are fine here, but I would recommend that the dark objects of the mountains, for instance, perhaps right around here. I don't know why that's white. So right around here, maybe a little bit up here, some of these details. Maybe not have the values so dark. If you lighten them up a little bit, just a tiny bit, that way you control more of what can be pure black. If you keep the pure black to the trees here and maybe these trees here, these trees are going to stand out more. It's really hard for me to show that in a short span of time, but those are the things that you want to keep in mind with landscapes. Hey there, Steve, Ozzy, Shauna, Cece, Fed Up, and who else jumped in? Oh, hey, Chrissy and Tina. Good to see all of you. My apologies for the technical difficulty. But anyways, that's what I gotta say about this one, Patricia. You did a fantastic job. Let's move on to Joanne here. She's got a couple submissions. So let's start off with this one. This is a beautiful graphite portrait. I'm not sure who this is, but it's a very lovely portrait. And a few things. I think this is a mix. Yeah, this is graphite plus charcoal. And I really like the charcoal in it. The charcoal lets you get much darker. Charcoal is known to be much darker than graphite. So it works really well. And I think you probably used it in the eyelashes, definitely the hair and the eyebrows. But the really dark values look really, really good here. And drawing looks pretty accurate as well. I think only a few things that I want to discuss here. The first thing is this cheek here. If you look, it sort of dips in a little bit. It's a subtle change in the line. The line is not smooth. Over on this side, you have the line nice and smooth. This line here, nice and smooth. This line has a small crease in it, and it shows. It sort of makes the face quickly asymmetrical for a lot of people. Just a normal viewer will pick up on that small ding in the cheek, and it just messes with the jaw line there. Um, Other than that, the drawing looks very accurate. I would say, let's see here, for a couple corrections in the eyes, one thing I would do is I would not be afraid to darken this part of the sclera, this top part of the sclera. Right now, the scleras, the white parts of the eye is just too bright, just too bright. Same thing with the iris here. Darken that top part of the iris. Don't be afraid of these values. Go dark. The other thing that I would have liked to see, you got to have more texture in your irises, because the irises, that's what people peer into, right? That's what they're looking for in portraits. They're looking to connect with the eyes, and you don't want your eyes to be smooth spherical shapes with zero texture. You want the iris to be noticeably textured differently than just the white scleras. And so one of my rules when coloring in eyes, the irises themselves, is you always go with the so here's the pupil. Let me sharpen that up a little bit. So hypothetically, let's say this is the pupil, and then I'll do the iris. So here's the iris, the pupil in the center. And what you should always do is think of it like 1-point perspective. So you have the center of the pupil, and from the center of the pupil, you want to always come out like this. So no matter where you're drawing or filling in on the iris, keep your lines coming out from this center point to create the texture and build up your layers that way. It works with graphite, it works with colored pencils, it works with acrylic paint, oil paint, watercolors, digital art. It doesn't matter what medium you're doing. If you fill in your irises like this, you're going to build up the subtle texture that just makes them look better. And then don't forget that the iris is also part of a sphere. So you have to remember those spherical shapes. So the shadow of the sphere doesn't stop just because you're working in the iris. So the top part of the eye will have that shadow here, and then oftentimes the bottom part of the eye has a shadow here as well. So you sort of have that filled in, but the top part wasn't filled in nearly as much as it should have been. And that's the change to the eyes. So here's your eyes. Here's a small modification, darkening the shadow on the top. The other thing with this particular portrait is there's no obvious light source. Most people won't be able to identify that the light source is sort of coming from this upper angle here, sort of from this direction. And the only telling sign is that this shadow doesn't happen on the other side of the face as much. And then also this side of the nose is darker. You have a little bit of a shadow over here. The other common mistake that I see in graphite portraits specifically is that, especially when people are working on white paper, is that they never go dark enough on the skin. The thing with, like, nobody's skin is pure white the way white paper is. So the value of even oftentimes the brightest part of a person's skin, as long as they're not like shiny and they have the pure white highlights in their skin, their skin's going to be significantly darker than white paper. So you have to cover the entire paper everywhere there's skin, and then you have to go darker for shadows and brighter for highlights. Oftentimes, brighter means erasing a little bit, but you don't want to use the paper. You don't want to use the paper as the overall highlight of the skin unless that highlight is actually pure white, which is just not very often the case with good portraits. The only time you get pure white highlights in portraits is if the person is sweaty and or wet in any way. They have water on their face or something along those lines, or they're really oily, and you have a bright light hitting them, an undiffused bright light. Then you're going to get those really bright white highlights. So I have a couple graphite portraits that I've done on the art club. Just jump to any part where I'm working on the skin, and you'll hear me say the same thing. Like you have to darken the skin. It feels wrong in the midst of doing it. It can often feel wrong, but once you grab your eraser and you start pulling out some of the highlights and then adding more layers to do the shadows, you have a much more professional looking portrait. Because that's the only difference between this portrait and something that you would look at and have a hard time keeping your mouth shut about it because, you know, your jaw drops open because it's amazing or something, is really just that they cover the skin adequately. Anyways, here's before, after, one more time. But otherwise, that's a really good portrait. You did a really good job. This is Joanne, another project from her. And this one I love. This is adorable. This one's really cute. So everything about this, I really, really like. I think that the paper choice, the paper color, rather, was really, really good. I think that lends itself well to the undertone of the flesh through the hairs, because pigs, they don't usually have hair that's so thick that you don't see the skin. And so I feel like that maize color is really good for allowing some of the paper to show through and sort of capture that fleshy tone beneath the skin. The face is really, really good. I would say the nose really sells this. You have that really lovely bright pink, and because of the maize color of the paper showing through, you have that ambient light coming through the skin, sort of creating that glow when you have a really bright light. Same thing with the ear. The ear looks really good, like the sunlight is coming through and brightening those parts, and the light is actually coming through the skin. So those just spot on. The eyes, adorable. Just everything about it is really good in the face. When you come down to the feet didn't get as much attention, I feel. I don't feel like you spent the amount of time on the face as the feet. And that's okay if you don't do that, but you do want to make sure that the feet still look like pig feet, because they sort of just look like spikes. They just look like spikes, right? These shapes. Now, I'm not very familiar with what pig's feet looks like, but these look way too spiky. I don't know if the original photo didn't have feet in it, and then you Googled like a character reference to do the feet. Either way, there's just something about the shapes of the feet that I feel like may not be the most accurate. I could be wrong, but the feet do throw me off. And that's a problem because the face is so adorable. You know, the face is adorable. And if you went for the feet, then I think you may have fallen into the very common paw trap, the paw hoof trap, which is to try to make it look like what you think it looks like as opposed to what it actually looks like in the reference. I don't have the reference photo for this, to pinpoint exactly where you did it, but for pet portraits, anytime someone's drawing a dog or a cat or any other various animal that has a paw or a hoof or any foot related appendage, um, the most common mistake is that they try to color it, draw it, fill it in the way that they imagine a paw or a foot or a hoof looking like, and it ends up not looking anything like it. And so I know that pigs have sort of the split toe kind of thing, the goofy thing in the back or whatever it's called. Um, and that's what I feel like you probably did a little bit, is that you didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, because why spend all the time putting in the detail on something like the foot? I totally agree. Why do that? The face is the focus. So maybe it's just that. It's hard for me to say for sure, but you do got to be careful with feet. Um, and my best advice when approaching the feet, paws, the foot type of appendages on anything, focus on the shapes only. Just focus on the shapes of the values. Don't try to draw anything. Don't try to draw what you think the foot looks like. Just focus on the shapes. Because once you finish with the color and the texture, you'll be like, oh, that no, okay, that looks right, even though it felt super wrong. That's the thing with paws and feet, um, is that they feel wrong the entire time you're doing them. That's probably the hardest part about them, is that it just always feels wrong until finally you're like, oh, okay, that looks like a foot. It didn't feel like I was making a foot, but it's a foot. The other thing, the last thing, I'm not sure why you wanted to cover the background paper the way that you did, because the first thing is that you have this gap. You have this gap, this halo effect around the entire pig. My guess, if I had to make a guess, is that you drew the pig and everything, and you didn't put the background in, and then after the pig was done, you're like, well, I don't want to just leave the background blank, and then you just kind of threw some color at it. I think it would be fine if it was left blank, first off. The other thing is that I think you rushed it. I feel like you rushed it. All these directional lines, all these lines, nothing's blended fully in the background. I can see lines all the way up here. All these horizontal lines. Now, having a directional background isn't bad if it works. Nothing's ever bad if it works. But this one doesn't work. It doesn't work for a couple reasons. First, you have the halo effect around the whole pig, so you have to be careful with that halo effect if you're going to do a background. The other thing about it is that these directional lines, they don't service anything in the artwork. Like, they're not, it's not a design. It's not like a printed backdrop of any kind. It's not snowing really hard or raining really hard on this pig, so it's not like motion lines. So those directional lines, they don't do anything good for the project. So you have to be careful with that. If you wanted to fill in the background similar to how you did this, either go perfectly horizontal, or perfectly vertical. I wouldn't, not too often would I recommend vertical, unless you want to make it feel reflective in some way. Horizontal is always the safer choice if you're unsure. But 45-degree angle coming down, it doesn't make any sense for this portrait of the pig here. And so definitely consider that in the future. The other thing with these darker colors, I sort of got the impression that you were going for a drop shadow. And I think that if I could somehow, maybe I can fake it a little bit. I'm going to pretend that I'm erasing the background by putting in this It's not quite the color of the paper, but I'm going to try to remove the background artificially here really quick just to discuss the drop shadow. Because I think that if you left the paper blank and then you just threw in a drop shadow at the end, it would look really good. And I think it would have captured more of what you were going for there. But an easy tool to approach drop shadows is just an ellipse. So if I put this ellipse sort of just here-ish, and then let's just going to fill it in with black. Give it a little bit of a blur. Let's go with, yeah, sure, that's fine. And then apply, change opacity. So simple. Let's bring out the legs from the shadow a little, something like that. It's just a simple oval, and you can start with this in almost every situation, almost regardless of what. Just to, so everyone's aware, this part over here would be cut off. The paper ends here, but with just a little oval there, I think you would have accomplished what you're going for with the drop shadow, if that's what you were going for. But just use an oval. An oval will almost always look good to a point, unless the object has sharp edges. But yeah, I think that works a little bit better than this background here. And you can use these purple colors that you have. You have these really lovely purple colors throughout the fur and everything. I love to see the purple. Aside from that, I mean, it's really good. Don't take any of my criticism in a harsh way. I mean it with only the best intentions. But I love this. I would hang it in my house. It's so adorable. Pigs are so underrated for pets. Smarter than most dogs. All right, up next is Cherry, and she is one of the several people that followed along on this Thomas Kincaid copy, and it turned out so good. It really did. You did such a good job, Cherry. This was not an easy project. There was just so much in it, and the sky, you did spot on the sky. Like all of that back there, the gradients, I think there's, I don't know what this is. There's like, at least on my screen, there's like this little blob of extra yellow right there that sticks out to me. But aside from that, like the sky, the gradient is perfect. The transition between the yellow and the blue, spot on. Just no green haze. You don't want to get the green haze in your sky. So good transition with the gray there. The clouds, I think maybe you could have been a little more ambitious with the value of the clouds, maybe darken them up just a touch, but they look perfect. You know, they're distance, they're good colors. The tree texture here and the values that you kept look really good. They stand far in the background. All the tree texture, all the tree texture over here is just gorgeous. It looks amazing. This tree looks good. These bushes back here look good. All of these bushes, everything foliage wise that you totally knocked out of the park. The only thing, maybe this part here, this edge just looks a little bit too sharp to be a bush, but it still looks good. I mean, that's about it. And in terms of like foliage, yeah, it looks really good. The roof, yeah, the texture on the roof, the shading, fantastic. The bricks on the house look great. I would say the only criticism with the bricks on the house is that the separation of each brick is almost too perfect. So the mortar in between your rocks, it's almost too perfect on every brick. And if you remember, some of these bricks have a darker shadow. So I went in with the dark color and I kind of created some of these lines because not every part of every side of the brick where the mortar is visible by the light. And so it would not be as bright as you have them. So a little bit more variation in those parts will make your bricks feel a little bit more natural. I know using black there didn't really make it look good, but the same thing a little bit down here. It's not as noticeable, maybe a bit over here. It's a little bit more noticeable on how perfect. Let me just grab a brown, dark brown or whatever. So these areas here, if some of these bricks had some shadows on the opposite side from the light, I think it would break up that perfection, because right now the bricks are just too perfect and they sort of feel a little bit artificial. And that's a difficult thing to accomplish. The natural part of imperfection is difficult to replicate because our brains are hardwired to replicate pattern and recognize pattern. And so it's hard to shut that off on purpose in this context. So other than that, I mean, everything looks really good. A few things with the lines, maybe you lost the line art a little bit, but this line here doesn't quite flow into each other. You can see that if I follow this line here, it sort of goes here-ish, whereas this line goes like that. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, especially in the patterns that these bricks would have otherwise made, because these ones come straight across, where these ones are kind of at an angle. And so it's just a little bit wonky right there. The other thing is that, careful, this is a perfectly vertical line here. Yours is just curling in just a little bit too much. And so it creates this slant that sort of throws things off just a little bit. This bridge, again, this curvature is more of a straight line. And if I were to extend this curve, you know, it sort of come here, whereas this line is coming here. So those things need to meet up just a little bit better. The very subtle things, I don't know if most people would pick up on that. And the bricks coming at this angle also don't match this here. So these lines of the bricks should be more, I guess, like a little bit more horizontal, just subtly. And then these bricks can come back a little bit. It's a subtle angle change, but that everything is made up of subtleties. So yeah, you lost your lines a little bit. I can see that you lost your lines a little bit. And so you just have to remember these things about, like, when you lose your lines, just remember vertical lines need to be vertical. So this pillar here that's holding up the bridge, that's a good way to gauge your accuracy. Those types of skills you get better at over time, and you have to think about them less. But when you're still building those good habits, then it's something you sort of have to remind yourself, especially when you lose your lines. Other than that, I mean, the project came out really great. Like, I have to nitpick because you just did a fantastic job here. So, yeah, it looks really good. Looks like you added a different blue than I did in some of the bushes, and I like that I can see this blue throughout the project and not just here on this grass. Looks like you used this blue also in the lanterns, which is a nice touch. Yeah, it looks really good. You did a fantastic job. This area right here is probably my favorite. Honestly, I think it looks better than mine. All right. And then Cherry's next project is this lovely little colored pencil project that we did of Volkswagen. And I don't really have anything to say about this one. I mean, you knocked it out of the park. The values in the bumper to get that shiny chrome look, the texture in the paint, the rust. The headlights look great, by the way. The headlights were the real challenge of this project. This was more about the reflective properties of an object with the bumper and the headlights and the paint itself, but not so much the paint. I left the headlights last when we were doing this project because they were the hardest part of the project. And your headlights look fantastic. Great distinct values to create really wide contrast to make them look shiny, to make them look transparent. I like that you have some of the yellow, some of the brown, you have all of the colors reflecting in there. And you have nice, even, symmetrical lines to create the texture of the glass. So I honestly don't have anything bad to say about it. The only thing is, I don't know what the tires feel a little thin, don't they? They feel a little thin, almost like they're motorcycle tires and not car tires. And I think that they're the highlight of the tread needs to be just a tiny bit wider. I feel like it needs to be a tiny bit wider. But other than that, it's perfect. I wouldn't change anything about it. Thank you for the submissions, Cherry. They were really good. All right, up next is Tina, and let's do this one first. She submitted this outstanding watercolor piece. The reference photo is on the left. Her watercolor painting is on the right, if you weren't able to tell, because it's hard to tell. The painting looks, the painting looks fantastic. I'll be honest, I have limited experience with watercolors, but I've used it enough to know that is extremely impressive. There's only two things that caught my eye in where you could improve this project. And one of them is only partially, because the first and the most obvious one is the water. I would have loved to see this purple in your water. Let's go with multiply. Is that working? Oh, I'm on the wrong. There we go. Yeah, the purple, you cannot submit artwork for getting purple. You'll get banned. You submit artwork and forget purple. Oh, getting banned. No, I'm just kidding, Tina. But immediately the water looks better. I added purple. Immediately the water looks better. And that's like the only thing that I was like, man, I wish she didn't forget the purple in the water, because it really makes a big difference. Two reasons. One, it shows the reflective property of the water reflecting the sky accurately. Two, it complements the fantastic yellow in the flower, and also the leaf or lily pad to the left, but mainly the flower. So that purple makes that flower stand out even more. Here's without the purple. The water just looks like it's gray, and it's like, meh, whatever. It's water. I know it's water. But then the purple comes in and you're like, oh, it's perfect. It's purple. You can't forget the purple. The second thing, exactly, Cherry, Ninja Purple. Always hiding. It's always hiding. The second thing that you did that wouldn't necessarily make it better, and what you did doesn't necessarily make it worse in any way. I feel like it might have been just an artistic choice, And that is that this lily pad, this main lily pad up front, the water droplets on it are brighter than the lily pad, which is the exact opposite of the reference photo. If I change this to just values here really quick. So what this shows you, this is just looking at pure values. So the only values, the darkest values are black here. So everything, it's about halfway, so about 50% midway in value. You can see that the water droplets are darker than the lily pad. Whereas over on yours, you can see that the water droplets are not blacked in, because on yours you have them whiter, you have them brighter than the lily pad beneath. And so you just did it opposite. And I think you probably did it opposite because you're like, oh no, I want these water droplets to look like water droplets. And if I make them darker than the lily pad, it's going to look like goo. It's going to look like goo and not water. But that's nitpicky because this still looks fine. I mean, if you added the purple, it still looks good. It's just that you could have done it differently in regards to making the water droplets darker than the lily pad. But here you just have them brighter with more white. You did it over here as well, and it looks fine. It looks good. Just don't ever submit another piece of work without purple. Nah, just kidding. All right. Now Tina's other project, and I believe you asked for some advice on this in the Facebook group, but submitting it is probably even a better choice because I can discuss this. First off, you've done a really good job on this project. This is not an easy project. For those of you that don't know, I sell a course, a pastel course on doing this specific project. It's like, 7 hours long or something like that. And I walk you through each step of doing this project. And everything looks really good. The face is adorable. The paw is good. The fur texture is good. I think that maybe the background is just a little bit too green. Maybe if the background was just toned down just a touch, that way the grass up here is brighter. Remember, it's that second type of contrast in images is saturation. So if the background was just a touch less saturated than the grass up here, then you'd have a little bit more of that depth that I was talking about earlier with the acrylic painting by Patricia. But it's not something that you need to change or even attempt to change or anything that I would even recommend changing. But what you can do is you can darken up the grass in the front. When, I don't know if you watched the final part of this tutorial yet, Tina, perhaps you did. But you want, it's all about like finessing this transition from the grass into the raccoon and vice versa, sort of fixing this edge. If you fix the edge of this grass here by working with the pencils and just going through and creating some more gaps there and creating a little bit more natural looking transition between the grass and the raccoon, you're going to find that you don't need to do anything else with this project, because you don't really need to do anything else with this project except work this edge, because we used masking film for the larger blades of grass here, and what you need to do is just help those transitions feel a bit more natural. And the way that you'll want to do that is use some of the black dark brown colors. Let me zoom in a little bit. So use some of the black dark brown, create some of these edges, create some of these gaps here. So let's just say there's let's just say there's a little gap here. Create some gaps in the grass here where the blades, gaps, you know what a gap is. I don't need to explain what a gap is. Oh, goodness. Been a long day. Yeah, so do this with some of the darker color. I'm not going to do too much of it because, well, I have a mouse and draw all day with a mouse. So you can see with just a few of those little gaps there, the grass is already starting to look a little bit more like grass. And then you can use your medium colors up here. So the brown color, you can add not necessarily what would be gaps, but just some shadows. You just want to increase the texture a little bit, only right here around, like nearest to the raccoon. And then you're going to be good. Also be careful with the black here in the fur. So if I highlight your edge a bit. So this black edge that you're sort of creating here, you want to make that less blocky, because right now it sort of looks like an extension of the blockiness of the grass, especially right here. Looks very blocky. Get rid of that blockiness with the black. Have the fur more naturally connect with the grass. And you do that, spend an hour just finessing that edge there, and you'll love it. Yeah, I think it looks good. And next time, next time you'll be able to confidently remove the masking tape knowing that you're done. But fantastic job on that project, by the way. Alrighty, up next is Diane. And I'm going to talk about that one last. Let's go through this one. She also did the Thomas Kincaid project. And Diane, correct me if I am wrong, but I believe you did this one smaller than everybody else. It looks smaller. Even here, it looks smaller. But you did amazing. I mean, working smaller and still squeezing in all of those details. Yeah, the sky looks wonderful. The gradient, perfect. Clouds, same thing that I mentioned to Cherry. You could have maybe just bumped up the contrast in the clouds just a touch. But as they are, they look perfect. So it's sort of just a thing. That top left edge, if you remember the top left edge. Oh, it is the same? I don't know why it just feels like it's on a smaller piece of paper. Maybe it's because all of the bricks are larger. I think that's what it is. All the bricks, it's like the brick size on your house and the bridge are 1.5 times the brick size of everyone else. And I think it just makes it look like it's magnified in some way. And so it feels cramped on the page or something. I don't know. No, it's great though. Yeah, the sky, fantastic. The depth, the value change from the trees in the back here, the texture on the trees, the leaves look good. This area, this is probably one of the hardest parts of this project, is this whole situation going on here, because you have so many layers. You have this tree, you have this purple tree, you have this tree that just comes out of nowhere, and then you have the grass, and you have this little windy trail going back. This is the hardest part, in my opinion, of this project. And both you and Sherry did fantastic on it. It looks awesome. This part here, these bushes here, maybe the layering got a little overwhelming a bit on your paper. It just right here, these bushes feel like the paper's not totally covered for some reason. I get that feeling. I could be incorrect about it not being totally covered, but it does feel like these little flowers that stick up like fingers I don't know, they don't feel connected to the bush because it sort of feels like there's an outline around them, if you know what I'm talking about. So this part throws me off just a tiny bit. This go back to cherries really. Oh, I gotta have cherries. Does not. Yeah, it was something with that. Oh gosh, can I work? Yeah, the chimney there. I thought the chimney looked a little bit low. Yeah, this chimney just looks a tad bit low. Maybe you probably lost your line art a little bit like everybody else did. This project was tough in that regard. Um, but I have to nitpick with these projects because you guys did so good on them. You did so good that you forced me to have to nitpick the. I have to measure your chimney just to find something wrong with it. So you know you did good when the only thing I can talk about is the measurement of your chimney just being off by 2 millimeters or something. Um, the softness of your water looks really good. If I go back, I'm trying to remember, cherries looks like, yeah, cherries has a little bit more texture in it, and so you have a bit more ripples. Yours, I feel like you could have went a bit brighter with the last highlights. So using the white to cut through some of the dark stuff. If I can imitate that really quick, let me try. So I'm gonna take the pink. That's sort of the brightest. So if I just take some white, I'm just gonna do horizontal lines. It's gonna look, oops. So something like this. Some of these bright lines coming through the mid-tone colors and whatnot would just help create a little bit more movement in the water. But over here, this part on the left side, this part looks amazing. I really like the way this came out. This whole space by the boat. It really looks reflective with the greens coming in. Maybe some of the reds should be in the water as well, but I mean, the way that it looks right there is really, really good. Yeah, lost the line art too often. Yeah, this was a difficult project, and losing the line art definitely gives you some trouble. But you did amazing on it. Everybody that did this project did so good. I felt bad that I didn't do better because everybody's looked better than mine. Um, but yeah, fantastic job, Diane. The next one, oh gosh, this project here is just fantastic. So this one is colored pencil on pastel mat. And it's, for those that don't know, because I know and Diane knows, but I'm not sure what project Diane was doing on this pastel mat, but she was doing it with pastels, and then she washed it off, and then she put this project on top of it. And it's crazy how cool it looks, because this is pastel mat that was used for some other project in some manner. I don't know what, but she washed it. She washed a piece of paper and then she reused it, and it just came out amazing. It came out so good. I love the color of the car that you did, because the color of the car was nowhere near pink. And so it had to have been a really good challenge. Oh, it was from the Monet project. Oh, okay, okay. That makes sense. The randomness of the colors makes sense now. But it must have been a really great challenge to take the original reference photo and shift the color in such a dramatic way, because if you guys remember me drawing this car, it was just a dark gray, maybe like a hint of blue. So to take it from that and just go totally pink with it, you did a really good job. One of the things that I talked about in that project, for those of you asking about changing the color of the car, essentially I just said take 3 values, find your middle color, find a darker version of it, find a brighter version of it. And you picked really good colors. The dark, the mid-tone, and the highlight of this pink. This, in the original, this air intake right here on the hood appears to be the same color of the car. Thus, you made it pink, but it would have been metal, so it wouldn't be pink. It would have been metal. So you would have had to have known exactly what that part of the car is to differentiate it from the pink of the paint. But it's not painted gray. It's actually just metal, bare metal, possibly chrome, but it didn't seem shiny enough to be chromed. So I think it was just stainless steel, raw metal. But the fact that you made it pink, it doesn't take away too much of that little part. The grill came out amazing. These little lines, I see the texture there, the emblem. Fantastic job on the lights. They look really good. Also, the pink that you added into the rims, spot on, looks amazing. Hints of the purple there, the pink. Same thing in the headlights. Headlights look good. The lights bending around here look nice and clean and sharp. Yeah, everything looks good. Yeah, even the trees, the reflections in the trees probably could have went a little bit harder on some of those lines as far as bringing in those darker pink tones. But yeah, I got nothing. I got nothing that I can really else complain about in regards to that. That project came out so good. I only wish that you didn't do better than me. That's the only thing. All right, up next is the third and final one from Diane. Just trying to make sure I don't miss anybody's questions. For these live critiques, I find it much harder to pay attention to chat, so I do apologize if I happen to miss your questions. If you did have any questions for me, I'm not going to try to scroll through everything, but if you did have any questions for me, feel free to ask them again. And I'll try to divert my attention just a little. So this is a project that somewhat collaborative, wouldn't you say, Diane? Because originally Diane, she had this idea here. She had this idea originally, and she was using the plain reference photos of the watering can, the flowers, the hands, and the background separated. And she asked me about this project, like some general tips or composition or something. I can't remember exactly what prompted it, but I decided to create this composition photo for her to help her visualize what she was after, what she was trying to do. And so this is my Photoshop composition, and then this is her rendition in pastels. And overall, I think that you did really good on execution, because it's not easy. It was a very difficult project, and I still think, even if I were to do this, I'd find it quite difficult. I like your hands better. Your hands in the dirt actually look better than the composition here. The dirtiness, like the fingers here actually look like they're holding dirt. It feels better than it does over here because the fingers are like perfectly clean, and that just doesn't make any sense. So this aspect here looks better. The hands look better, I think, in your artwork here. The watering can looks good. I would have liked to see some of the orange light interacting with the watering can just a little bit. Like right here, you can see this orange bit and a little bit of the orange coming up from the bottom, and then also a hint of the orange over here. That's going to help. That's going to help the watering can feel like it's part of the environment. The other thing is the background. So you want to establish that silhouette light. And the silhouette light, as you can see, is not just having that area blown out and being very light, very white, but you can see how saturated it is. Yours is pretty much pure white here, which matches the reference photo. But as it comes into the bright area, I feel like you wanted to leave that bright. You wanted to create that sensation of light and that brightness and that warmth. And in order to do that, you have to get this color in there. Yeah, just got to get this bright orange into that area. You can see how stark that bright orange is in comparison to the grayer parts of the background. And then this brown here, you can see how much darker that is. Now this is going to do two things. By establishing those darker colors and those more saturated colors to create that sensation of light, is that it's going to make the watering can stand out from the background more, and it's going to make the flowers stand out from the background more. Because I believe I mentioned that what makes the flowers difficult in this composition is that they're so light. And so if you have them very light against a very light background, it's hard to separate them from the background. So by having these colors here around the flowers, all of a sudden the flowers just pop off the page much more nicely. The flowers stand off the page because now the values around the colors make them stand out. Should you fix it, or is it impossible? Is the background soft pastels or pastel pencil? If it's soft pastel, I wouldn't attempt it personally. If it's pastel pencil, you can do it, but it's going to take time. Because at least with the pastel pencil, you can continuously layer and you have a lot more precision, so you can get up to the edge of every object. But this part here is going to be a nightmare. Trying to do the background right there in between your little water droplets, that's gonna be tough. How come I can't go? Interesting. Okay, there we go. Yeah. That's about it for that project. The other thing is that you didn't quite establish any sense of light and shadow on the plant itself. See here, I sort of showed you how it would look with the shadow coming down on this side, and then you'd have a little bit of the rim light around the flowers on either side and a little bit more on the right side. But yeah, it would be, I feel like it'd be a bit much to suggest going back and trying to fix it. I mean, it still looks great. You could tone down the green though. Here, the green is a bit saturated, and if it's less saturated, also darker around the hand here, that's going to make the hands stand out a bit more. Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, this is the tough project. But that's why I always stress, like when it comes to backgrounds, like you have to spend a ton of time on backgrounds, because especially in this project where you used masking film to protect your your other subjects. I mean, as soon as you pull that masking film up, it's going to be real rough to make any corrections to the background. And in this case, nearly impossible. Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always found when I second guess myself, which is pretty much every time I do anything, that when I have my reference photo in Photoshop, I just use that color picker. I just look at it. I'm like, man, that color looks so awful. Like as soon as you come in here, you're like, oh gosh, oh gosh, what is this? What kind of flower is gonna be as gray as it gets? Like that's what you look at. Look at that gray. You can't get more gray than that. That is the grayest flower in the history of flowers. Um, and to use what would amount to like one of the darkest grays in the Carbothello set, and then be applying it to this flower right here. That flower, yours, is still gray, um, which is actually kind of surprising that I. Okay, here we go. It's probably closer to this color. So it's pink gray, but goodness, look at that value difference, right? The value difference is it's a wide gap between those two values. So yeah, I agree. It's tough to apply those colors when they feel wrong, but anytime I feel like I'm wrong, I just I just grab that color picker and I'd be like, okay, here we go. What's this color? Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I'm just gonna go with that color, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I can't think of a single occasion where it's backfired, where I hone in on that one particular color and I just go for it. Anyways, that's a tough project, but you did a really good job on it, considering the level of difficulty. All right, up next is Lisa. She did this beautiful pastel piece here. This feels like it's from a TV show or something. I could be wrong, but if it's from a TV show, it's probably slightly before my time, considering the font. Uh, the font just feels like this is from the 70s. Um, so about a decade out of my time frame. But it looks really good, and this is the original reference, as you can tell, and this is one of the character references that she posted in the comments over on Facebook as well, because she was going for more of this warmer orange tone as opposed to the yellow of the original. And I'll be honest, I don't see that reflected in this. I don't see that orange color that she was after, because I mean just paint it orange. Because that's the color. You just take that orange color and you just go with that color. Um, and it would have been that easy because you have done everything so accurate. Like everything looks so good here. Like it looks so good, ridiculously good. And so all you had to do was get this orange and then apply it, and then you would have been there. So maybe you only wanted to subtly put it in. I don't know, um, but goodness, like there's nothing else to say other than if you wanted it that orange, then you should have just picked that orange color and applied it, because I can't imagine that you would have messed it up in any way whatsoever, because the subtlety and the headlights and the grill up here, mm, is so good. So good. The rims, the tires, even the words on the tires. I can't quite read it, but this looks like it says Firestone backwards and upside down. Uh, yeah, it just looks so good. The only the only critique that I could say is you started putting like a little bit of the ground here, and I would have preferred a single direction for the ground. So the ground here, I can see the line that's drawn here. Let me just grab a random color. So I can see the directional line that goes right alongside the side skirt. I can see that line. And I can see this line and this line. And it's not bad that your your gravel or your asphalt ground here has texture. By all means, I think the texture is a really good idea. But what I would have preferred to see is more horizontal direction from your initial coloring, because that horizontal direction builds a really nice platform for the ground. It creates a plane. And this direction is visible here, but the only problem is it's all over the place. So the direction is like this a little bit, and you can see some of the lines here and here and here. And then right here, there's a random line that goes here. There's another one that goes here and here and here. So these perfectly horizontal lines is the direction, the ideal that I would have liked to see. Yours are going just a little bit over the place. And I'm being super nitpicky here. I have to emphasize that. I'm being very nitpicky. This is beautiful and absolutely perfect. But for the ground and the way that you just partially filled it in, sort of like a little bit of a frame of the car, I would have preferred those horizontal lines. But yeah, you're setting the bar real high for the rest of us, Lisa. So thank you for the submission. Alrighty, up next is Sandy, and she did this pastel painting of some pumpkins and got a little bit of the reference photo down here with what appears to be probably a white colored pencil for the outline or something, perhaps for the transfer of the line art, whatnot. And yeah, this one came out pretty good. It's a little bit more stylized. I think that was the plan. I'm not 100% sure, but it has a little bit of a stylization to it. And the only thing is that in spite of a stylization, if that was the goal, I'm not sure exactly what the goal was, to have that more stylized look or to go more towards realism, is that the pumpkins lack the pumpkin texture. They need the lines to be, and you have some of it a little bit, but these lines need to be more obvious here. The lines that make up the skin of the pumpkin, all of these lines are missing throughout all of the pumpkins. And without these lines here, without the context of the reference photo, you sort of are unsure. You want to say you're looking at pumpkins because they're orange, the stems of them look like pumpkins, but the final texture, all those lines that make up pumpkin skin, you just don't see them in your painting here. And so just add the lines. Yeah, just add the lines, and then you're good. And then nobody's guessing as to whether or not they are indeed looking at pumpkins. Short one, but a sweet one. Oops, what happened there? You did a good job on it. Yeah, I would just say the lines. Yeah, just the lines. You could maybe boost the highlights a little bit in some of the areas, get a little bit brighter on the highlights, but yeah, nice colors. Nice values, and just add those pumpkin lines and you're good to go. Alrighty, up next is Darek and his continued amazing graphite portraits that he always submits to these. Darek, I think I saw you in chat, so good to see you. I love this portrait. This portrait has so much character to it. This giant glass of what looks like beer. This foamy stuff at the top, at least to me, it looks like foam, it looks like beer. And if that is the case, then excellent, because you just made whatever's in this glass that I think is beer look like beer. So I hope that it's beer, because that's impressive. The reflection, I couldn't think of the word, the reflection here in the glass is just so good. I can see the person. You can see the person right there. It looks like the person here, the arm coming down, arm here, and almost like this is his other arm holding the camera, maybe. This looks like a window. Like the reflection in the glass tells a story, and it looks awesome. It looks awesome. The face is lovely. The skin, I think you could have gone maybe a little bit darker on the skin. I just gotta say that. A little bit more overall on it is beer. Awesome. Good to see you, by the way, Darek. And the one thing here, where the hair separates from the face, this is like the darkest line. This line here, and I would have liked to see this value a bit more in the eyes. So same thing with Dottie's graphite portrait in the eyes here. I would really like to see more. Maybe not that dark. I want to see these values darker, and I'm using values that are in you on the photo, so I'm not using artificial darkness. Like that value right there exists in the pupil. I want to see that value up here. Create, even if it's not in the reference photo, you need to make the artistic choice to start thinking of your eyes like this more in 3D. Because here's without and here's with, and you just can't argue that the eyes don't look better when you force them to be more three-dimensional by adding the shadows. Even if the lighting in the original photo doesn't create those shadows, in almost every instant, eyes immediately look more engaging and more intense when you add that three-dimensional look to the eyeball itself, not just the iris. The other thing that stands out about how phenomenal this portrait is when I swing my arm over and knock over my glass. I didn't mean to. Well, you should have taken it. I'm excited. You know, look at this portrait. It's amazing, and just knocking stuff off my desk. My apologies for that. Yeah, I knock over my glass. My wife comes running. What was I talking about? Oh, yes. The texture of the sweater. Oh my goodness, is that not one of the most amazing things ever? The texture in the sweater is just so good. It's so good. It might even be better than the beer. The fact that I can look at this and I can see beer in the cup, and then I'm immediately drawn to the sweater and just like the intricacies and the precision in it. The precision in the texture is also just, you have to commend it because it's so good. And then I get to the hair, and don't get me wrong, I love this portrait. It's fantastic, but Darek, you let me down a little bit with the hair. Okay, I'm 100% honest all the time. This part of the hair looks great. This part, I think you started here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you started with the hair right here. Because this part of the hair, when I look at it, I'm like, that is really good looking hair. And then I come down here and I'm like, okay, it's still, it's still hair. Yeah, it's still hair. And I get here and I'm like, what is this? And I get here, I'm like, oh, okay, he started here, he worked his way down, and he probably did this in like one sitting. And then by the time he got here, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of this hair. and then and then you just kind of scribbled it in down here. Same thing happens here. This looks good. Okay, that's hair. Here, okay, okay. I think you did this side first, and then you did this side, and then it gets here, and I'm like, okay. And then it gets here, I'm like, Darek, what are you doing? What are you doing with this? And I know it's tough. Hair is one thing, but hair over top of a sweater with this much detail, oh, you're just asking to be tortured, because that's tough. That's really, really tough to do. And so I know that you've watched a few of my colored pencil portraits, and the way that I approach hair, it's the same with graphite and colored pencils. You want to focus on the big shapes. Don't don't concern yourself with the individual lines, with the individual hairs. You have to get past that. And if you had you focused on just the body of the hair, especially down here, you would have been able to capture it a lot easier. And so you have some of these big shapes. Yeah. You have some of these big shapes put in, like this. Why is that? I definitely picked red. So this shape here, you have a couple, like right here, you have a shape. So if you, this shape beside her face, you can see this, and then it comes up and then drops down, sort of like there. This shape coming in here, you have this shape right there, and this shape with a separation between those two, something like that. So you're seeing the shapes, you're seeing some of these shapes, but I think you may be having a difficult time connecting them. But if you put these shapes in just as like blocks, big squiggly diamonds is what I always call them, maybe you feel less confident about connecting those abstract shapes into the rest of the hair. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but if you focus on just the shapes, ignore all the strands, and then you connect to those shapes, you'll find that hair becomes a lot easier to tackle. And so when you have this top section looking like spot on, like really, really good, I can see all the little, where you use the eraser to create some of the flyaways and stuff like that. I don't see those little flyaways down here as much. And so you spent a lot of time up here to get it looking really good, and then you got a little bit fatigued, which happens, that's why it's important to always take breaks and sort of walk away, so you never get a little rushed, because I feel like you got a little bit rushed here at the end. And you can see it in the work if you look closely. You may have rushed a little bit just because you were excited to get it done or whatnot. But that's what I would recommend. Is just sort of take breaks and try to focus more on the shapes, the largest shapes that you can, before connecting it with texture. And you'll find yourself being able to fill in the hair with less fatigue from top to bottom. The other thing is that if you break the hair up into steps, so if you focus on the form, the big shapes, the body, and then you connect those with minor details, so smaller shapes essentially, and you do all the hair in that way. So you do the big shapes everywhere, then you do the smaller shapes everywhere, and then you do the gradient shading everywhere, and then you add in the single hairs. And so if you break it down into those steps by doing every part of the hair in those steps, when you get to the flyaway part, you'll be able to do that everywhere without sacrificing, your energy in one particular area by doing it really good in one area and a little less good enough. But I'm being nitpicky because I have to be, because all the portraits that you submit are just so good. Thank you for the submission, and fantastic. All right, up next is Linda. Linda's got the Volkswagen project as well. She decided to do the background, unlike sane people. It's great. Lots of fun texture. This is a colored pencil drawing that looks like a colored pencil drawing, and I like that. You didn't add a bunch of layers to cover up the grain of the paper. The paper still shows through, and it shows through everywhere. That's the thing that a lot of people get wrong when they do colored pencil work and they have one area that's perfectly polished, and then the rest of the area looks like a colored pencil drawing. And so you have to choose that from the beginning. So if you're going to go, oh, okay, Chrissy, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and sleep well. Yeah, 1:30. That's way later than I've stayed up in like 4 months. But yeah, that's something that you have to. Oh, you're so welcome, Darek. Yeah, thank you for the submission, and I look forward to seeing your future submissions as well. Okay, I'll finish the sentence this time. So in the beginning, you have to understand the style and look that you're going for with any medium. And so to get this, it's going to look like a colored pencil drawing. You have to choose that from the beginning. And if you deviate from it anywhere, it's going to stand out. So in this case, this looks like a colored pencil drawing, and it looks great. I like that grainy, textured colored pencil look. Certain projects just look really great with it. And with that style in mind, you did a fantastic job, Linda. Like the texture in the paint, the reflection, the values. Again, the tires. What is it with the tires? They just look. Am I going crazy? Like the tires, they look thinner, right? Like I'm not. I need to pull up the reference photo because I'm going to pull up the reference photo right now because I am convinced that the tires feel thinner. And maybe they are actually thinner in the reference photo, so I'm going to have to do that really quick. Give me a second. References. What did I call this project? VDub, that's it. Huh. Let me just open this in Photoshop. They are that thin. Huh. I guess, maybe they're just that thin. Maybe it's just the brightness. Like your highlights. I'm looking down here, right? Looking down in this. Maybe it's just the brightness, because the value difference between the treads and the shadow part is just too bright. But yeah, maybe I'm just going crazy. Yeah, I think maybe I'm just going crazy. So I'll stop talking about the tires, because I guess you got this tires spot on as well. Now I have to go back to the reference photo. Oh, the reference photo doesn't have the background. The only thing that stands out that's truly incorrect is the perspective in the background. This line, so if I extend this line, something like that, and I extend this line, this is the vanishing point right here. me just make that a different color. So the vanishing point would be right here, which means this line is, all that line should be connected. This line should be connected. Yeah, that's pretty close there. These lines should be connected. Yeah, that's good. So the texture on this wall is breaking the perspective. Everything else seems to be pretty good. So this part, this balcony here, that balcony's, nope, it's not going to the vanishing point. This balcony's not going to the vanishing point. This balcony looks like it's pretty close, but this balcony here breaks perspective. These balconies here break perspective. So you have to be careful when things are in perspective, and this is part of the reason that I cut the background out. I cut the background out because I didn't want to add more time to this project, because this was actually just kind of a filler project where I wanted to focus on the reflective properties of car and the bumper and the headlights, not so much the 1-point perspective of the background. The other thing about 1-point perspective is that vertical lines are vertical. Every vertical line. So that means this doorway to the balcony needs to be vertical. This needs to be vertical. All this needs to be vertical. This line here needs to be vertical, which means that this line needs to be vertical, and this line, you can see where things are off a little bit. So there's some of the vertical lines are skewed a little bit, especially this one here. This one's a little bit the most skewed line. So you got to be careful with that anytime you're dealing with perspective. You got to make sure, because even if there's some shapes in perspective that people won't immediately recognize as being a little off or skewed, but people that know perspective will notice. You know what I mean? And so you got to be precise anytime you're dealing with buildings that are in perspective, because almost any viewer, whether or not they know perspective or not, will be able to recognize that things feel sideways, because that's what happens when things get skewed in perspective, is they feel like they're leaning one way or another. And so almost anybody will be able to feel that. Otherwise, everything looks good. So thank you for the submission. And I'll move on to Linda's second colored pencil project. And she did this car as well. And she went with this beautiful blue color. Actually, I just realized that you went with like the same blue as the Volkswagen. So that's pretty cool. I didn't notice that. And it looks really good. Yeah. It still has that this is a colored pencil drawing look, which again, I think is really great. I think it looks cool that way. You added some fun stuff in this little face in the sky. I don't know what the meaning is behind this stuff in the back, but I'm sure it has some meaning to you. And so it's fun. It's fun. I think this upper part here is less realism than what happens beneath it. So the car and everything feels more realistic. Obviously, with this plane, you're not going for realism. So with that in mind, that excuses the foliage and the trees also feeling more cartoony, I guess would be a word, because the plane itself is very cartoony. I don't think there's an argument to be had that we're going for realism here on the plane. So the fact that the foliage and the trees also sort of have that cartoony feel, the top part feels cartoony. Or maybe you could even say that it's all a brick wall and then somebody painted that on the brick wall. So maybe it's a painting on the brick wall in a parking garage. That could be the story behind it. Okay, Ozzy. Yeah, you take care. Have a great weekend. Uh, yes. So the rest of the car, everything looks great here. The curvature of the rim, just a little bit flat right here. You can see that, just the tiniest bit flat. And then also up here, just a smidgen. A smidgen is like this, like that. It's a smidgen. That right there. That's a that's a smidgen. So there, everything else looks good. Maybe you could have gone a little bit darker in the blue, a little bit darker down here for the dark part of the blue in general. But it looks good like this too. Yeah. Can't think of anything else. Yeah, it looks good. Thank you again, Linda, for the lovely submission. Alrighty, up next is Susan. Susan also did the Volkswagen project. And Susan, I swear, every time you submit something, I just end up staring at it for like longer than any other project because I am a huge Susan fan. And you know this because ever since you submitted the Butters and Toast project like a year ago or however long it was like a year ago now that I think about it. I just can't get over your style, your look. You have such a defined look in your artwork, and every time I come across it, I'm just mesmerized by the uniqueness of it because I just don't see anything else like it. And it has this project in particular is something that I feel is outside of what you would normally do, and yet it's your style, your look still comes across. And a few things that I kept looking at was the texture in the paint. In particular, this little section right here, this little section, and then this section here. I don't know why, but every time I see this, every time I look at it, I've looked at it like 10 times now for like an hour at least. I just keep going through these sections. I'm just like, the texture is so cool. It looks like graffiti. It looks like actual graffiti. Like somebody tagged the side of this car 3 times in 3 different locations. And it just, I don't know, it just works so well. It just works so well. There's always such little that I can say about your work because I just enjoy it so much. So I'm so biased. And I think the only thing that maybe I would maybe 2 things that I would sort of change about this. The treads on the tires. The treads on the tires are a little bit too linear. They don't feel broken up and they don't feel like used tires. And in the case of this car, I imagine the tires would feel quite used. And so these harder lines, if they were broken up by horizontal lines to create that tread texture, then maybe that would sort of remove the smoothness because it leaves like this smoothness to the tires that just doesn't fit the car as well. The other thing is the harder black lines coming through the headlights. Now the contrast, this headlight is I like this headlight more than this headlight actually. And the only reason I like the left headlight more is because this shape in the middle, this darker shape sort of gives the rest of the headlight the reflective and transparent look. Whereas over here, this light doesn't quite capture that transparent glass look as well as the left one. And the vertical black lines over here, they don't bother me as much as it does on the right one. I think that's just because the shape here that you created, maybe just not dark enough, something about it. I mean, anybody else feel that that the left headlight feels like it's more reflective than the right headlight. That's the feeling that I get there. And I'm not even quite sure how how I would correct it, but it just feels like the values might not be dark enough on the right one. Other than that, you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for the submission. Up next is Elaine, and she did this lovely pastel portrait. Actually, I didn't realize this was a pastel portrait until I read her comment. But monochromatic pastel portrait. And this was another project that I wanted to talk a little bit about composition, because this is a tricky one. Compositionally, from the reference photo to the artwork, it's difficult because the photo is not amazingly composed. It was probably just a family member, perhaps Elaine herself, taking a photo of her daughter and grandchild. And so she was probably not, using the rule of thirds and trying to compose the most thought out photo. Because most people don't take photos like that. So with that in mind, taking a less than perfectly composed photo and then using it as reference for artwork, you always have to address composition. And composition is quite ambiguous and subjective. There are some general rules that people have incorporated over the years, like the rule of thirds or the golden ratio or vertical horizontal lines and intersections and focal points and other stuff. But at the end of the day, composition really just asks the viewer, does it feel balanced? And balance is hard to create when you don't really know what forces something to either be or not be balanced, because the rule of thirds doesn't always work. You line stuff up perfectly with the rule of thirds and it can feel one-sided and unbalanced and stuff, so that doesn't always work. So where do you go from there? So anytime you're using a reference photo or anytime you're creating artwork in general, you want to take 10-15 minutes to just address the composition. So what I would recommend and what I do personally, if I'm doing something along these lines where I'm using a reference and the reference isn't perfect, I want to make a drawing that's better. So I'll do thumbnails. So whatever my dimensions are, I will just do smaller thumbnail sketches following those exact dimensions and trying to make sure that wherever I compose the subject, it feels balanced, it feels better than the reference. And so in this case, I'm just bringing it to everyone's attention about the importance of considering composition before just, doing the line art and putting it on the paper in any which way. Not that there's a lot that I would change about this composition. The only thing compositionally that I would change about the way that Elaine did this one is the right arm. So the arm coming through, it gets cut off by the photo, which is not a big problem. But this right arm here plays a big role in making the baby feel supported, and it also gives context to the way her shoulder is positioned, because her shoulder is being brought up. It's really close to her face, and the reason her shoulder is being lifted up, she's lifting the baby towards her, and this arm, her left hand, is barely a supportive feature of the baby. her whole her whole arm right here is what's really holding the baby's head up, not the fingers. The hand is sort of rested here, sort of being, and the baby's head is cradled between the fingers and the arm. So the arm plays a much larger role in supporting the baby than her hand. And the problem with cutting out her arm is because is that this shoulder here, it's raised. And so it makes sense that her arm is also raised. And when you make the choice, because I know what I have the feeling that this shape, this sort of cradled shape is what she was aiming to sort of create with the choice of removing the right arm. But I just think it would work better with the arm coming down and this shadow here, this triangle that happens right here. And if that line existed, this shape existed, and then also her other shoulder is also removed, which sort of makes her shoulder feel like it's rolled forward into the blanket here. And it alters the anatomy of the person in the photo. And you never want to make compositional choices that distorts anatomy of really anything. This is why when you take a photo of somebody, you don't cut the photo off right at the base of their neck, because then it will artificially make their neck look like it just goes on forever for whatever reason, which is why you would never do it at the shoulders, because then it just feels incomplete. That's why you don't do it at the elbows, because then it makes the arms just look like they go on forever. So a general rule with composition when it comes to people is that you never cut off at a joint. Never cut off at the elbow, at the wrist, at the fingertips, at the hips, the neck, like I said, the knees. You always want to cut off either above it or below it, but never right on it, because it distorts the anatomy of the person. And it's same as here. Like I wouldn't have removed the shoulder, and I wouldn't have removed the right arm, because both of them create the anatomy of the position. So there's too much position that is required for that pose to look correct. And even if it was just a single line that allowed the viewer to perceive her shoulder and her arm, it would have made a big difference, in my opinion. Now, the other thing with composition is when you look at the photo, when you look at the reference photo, you have to ask yourself, is the subject the positive or the negative space, the positive or negative space? And in this case, the subject is the positive space, meaning the background is blank. So the shape, the silhouette, is created by the dark values of the subject. So if the dark values exist in the subject, then you cannot make the background the same value of the subject like you did here. So the dark values in the subject are being totally overpowered by the use of this dark gray in the background. And you can use darker colors in the background to create this sort of glowy type of effect. I don't know if that was the intention for this particular piece. You have sort of this halo effect coming through here and then down through here, but then it just does whatever it wants down at the bottom. So you remove the consistency of the look that you're going for. And then also you have to take into account the shape. You're working with an asymmetrical shape, this sort of overall asymmetrical shape here, polygon with some rounded edges. So symmetry is a great way to use in composition. So you could have stuck with an oval type shape, and then for the corners of the project, you could have added some vignetting to create that glow effect without using such a dark value overall for the background. Because like I said, that competes with the main subject. So you want to balance those things out. You don't want the background competing with the main subject. And here it's kind of competing simply due to the values. There's not a lot of value information in the reference photo. First off, the sheet, the blanket, pure white. Her top or gown or whatever, I imagine it's a hospital gown, it's basically white. Everything's just white. And value is what creates interesting things in artwork. Contrast is the most important aspect of any piece of work. So you need to try to maximize that the best that you can. And the first way is to change the value to enhance it. So you can make the skin you can make the skin darker. You can make the skin of the baby darker as well. The skin of the baby actually looks a little bit darker than the mother, probably because it's a newborn baby, and newborn babies are all red and blotchy and darker skin. So you could have used that to help her stand out from the background more instead of the smoky background. And then the fingernail here on the thumb is too square. And so you're cutting off the left side of the thumb. You see, right here, that part of the thumb, this part of the skin that comes out on the left side of the thumbnail, you've sort of shrunk it. And so her thumb looks a little bit more like a toe. Fingernails are tough. Fingernails are tough. The fingernails are tough. I have nothing. Fingernails are tough. They're hard to do. Delicate shapes, because you get the shape wrong just a little bit, and then all of a sudden your fingers look more like toes, and toes look gross. So careful with that. Precision with portraits, precision in the drawing are so vital, especially human portraits in particular, because everybody knows what people looks like. So you don't even have to be an artist to sort of pick up on things that look a little off. The other thing, and the last thing, good job on the smile, by the way. The smile, from this angle, the smile is very difficult. You actually captured it quite accurately and quite well. The one last thing that I gotta talk about is this eyebrow here. This eyebrow it's stopping right here, and it's like perfectly straight line. This eyebrow, this is where your eyebrow's at. So this is where you drew your eyebrow if I were to copy it over to the reference photo. But if you see, her eyebrow actually comes in here, comes up and curls down a little bit, and sort of it dissipates into the crease of the eye right here. So your eyebrow, because it's shifted so far to the right, you see this shape right here. This is that space in between your eyebrows right here where it comes down, that little triangle. You made hers much bigger. So when I hide these lines, you can see that her nose, it feels like it widens up as it goes up. It just feels like it's much, much wider than it should be. As opposed to over here, you can also see this shadow here. This shadow coming underneath her brow bones right here, kind of cradles this part right here. You don't have that shadow. So when you turn and you look at your profile view, your brow bone comes out and then in, it dips right here, that dip, and then your nose curls out. Yours doesn't. So by missing that shadow, you create this bridge of the nose that starts here much wider than it should be, and then it just comes in. And that makes her bridge of her nose look like a big triangle like that. And so you gotta be very, very careful with missing those shadows and then also misplacing the eyebrows. Because then as when you misplace such important features on a person's face, you're going to change the you're going to change who it looks like. Fortunately, you captured the smile enough, and this angle is awkward enough that you can still see the resemblance, but the nose is much different. The nose is much different. Okie dokie. Thank you for the submission. It came out good, but it was a good project to discuss composition on, for sure. The last one, Grandpa Steve. It's been so long since seen some Grandpa Steve work, and unfortunately, the photo that you submitted was really, really small. So if I zoom in, it's very pixelated because the photo itself wasn't large enough for me to spread it out or to enlarge it any more than this. But this is colored pencil on black paper, and I just gotta say, it came out really good. I love the contrast. Love the contrast. The subtlety of the sea turtle coming out of the paper. It looks really, really good. I would love to see a better quality photo of this project that you did, because there's just this ominous nature of this sea turtle, and I just never saw a sea turtle in that way before. I've always imagined sea turtles surrounded by colorful fish and sea plants and turquoise water and all of that. Like, that's when I think sea turtle, that's what I think of. I think of Hawaii and colorful flowers and bright colors. Here, this sea turtle looks like it does not mess around. Like, this is a sea turtle that I do not want to run into in the ocean because it looks like it's about to eat me, which is just a cool way, of altering my perspective on what sea turtles are capable of, because they are large, strong animals that could probably bite you in half relatively. Yeah. So thank you, Steve, for the lovely submission. That is the final submission for today. So yeah, thank you guys so much for all the lovely artwork. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I will be starting monthly exercise projects for the art club, and I'll be starting that in the new year. Probably have that up on the website like the second week of January when I get back. And so those projects will be designed to help sort of work with all of the stuff that I talked about today: composition, color, contrast, texture, all that stuff. And I'll be doing a new one each month, and they'll just be helpful projects for you to do. So if you want to participate in that, then click on the link in the description, sign up for the art club. The other benefit of the art club is that you noticed a number of people submitted more than one project. Art club members can submit as many projects as they want for me to do for these critiques. I hope that you found these critiques helpful. I love doing them because it also benefits me. And when I have to continuously think about all of the things that make up good artwork, I get to remind myself for what I need to do for future projects to make my own artwork look good. So this benefits everybody all around. And so I hope that you found something interesting. And if you didn't have a project submitted, join the Facebook group, because You don't have to be an art club member to submit at least one project for me to critique. And I'll be doing the next critique the first Friday of February. So it will be a little while before I do another critique. So get to work on some of your projects, and hopefully you'll have something to submit next time. But anyways, that is going to be it for today. So thank you guys so much, and have a great weekend. Take care. Peace.